Hey there, experts. Welcome back to another episode of Experts About Nothing. Pretty iconic episode for you all today. We have guest and fellow podcaster, Esha Pathak. And Esha is truly so accomplished. She has a podcast called Turn Off the Ringer, which is truly amazing. Highly recommend you guys follow the podcast on Instagram and subscribe and listen. We'll link everything below. She's also a speaker, a model, and a consultant by day, and she just started launching workshops in the city, so we will put all of her information below, but today's conversation is focused around Esha's upbringing. She was born and raised in India and moved here for college, so got transitioned into America and building her personal and professional life here, and starting a passion project not once, but twice. So it's a very spicy, interesting episode.
Before we dive in, we just wanted to quickly plug the good old pod. Please follow us on Instagram at Experts About Nothing if you're loving the pod. And please subscribe wherever you listen. Also, if you're feeling fun and fresh, follow us on our TikTok. Also at Experts About Nothing. And now let's dive right in. Audio Jungle.
Hello, Esha.
Hi, welcome
Hello.
to the podcast.
I'm nervous, excited, all of the above.
Yeah?
I've never done an in-person, okay, we've done interviews, we've spoken about this, but like an in-person recording. So now it feels like I'm recording a podcast, but I'm also chatting with friends.
Wait, this is your first in-person?
Yeah, it is actually. Very excited.
I'm so excited for this conversation because we're talking to someone else who also has a podcast.
Yes!
Which never has happened.
No. I think once I started my podcast too, I started vetting out a whole different niche of people because I was like, okay, what do you do? Are you a podcaster? Let's be friends. And that's how we met. And I was like, okay, this is so fun. So I'm glad that it worked out.
And there's so much commonality that I didn't even know
Yes.
would be there when we first met. And it was like so natural.
She's a natural expert.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, guys. I'm vetted by the real ones.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to be diving into a bunch of different things today, but before we start, I think getting to know you and getting to know your like background and your upbringing is going to be key to who you are as a person. So first, can you just give us a little background on like your upbringing, your family life, kind of like things that shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, and I think you guys are definitely gonna understand / relate because we're all South Asian women. But I grew up in India and I lived there till I was 18. I'm an only child. That's a huge part of my personality. Although I will say, not a lot of people can catch on to the fact that I'm an only child.
Biggest slay.
Biggest slay.
Biggest slay.
Some people are like, you give me older sister energy. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. But the only children always know I'm an only child. But
I don't think, well, I don't know. I don't know if I have the best detection, but I feel like I was like, no.
I called you out though. I was like,
I know,
are you an only child?
yeah,
I was like, okay, you're only child energy. In a good way. In a good way. But grew up an only child, lived in India till I was 18, and then I moved to the States to study. So I went to Penn State and then I studied economics and political science. I think that one thing I always say to everyone that I chat with when they're surprised by the fact that I'm from India is that I grew up in a conservative country with very liberal parents / family members. And so even as I was growing up in Mumbai or like New Delhi or whatever it was, I always had really supportive parents that were like, oh, like you need to explore things that are out of your academic interest. My mom is an author. My dad is also an artist. He's a full-time company corporate guy, but then on the side, like he plays a lot of instruments, he sings, he's like, you know, an artist in his own right. And so I think that that kind of influence started to shape who I was and what kind of things I enjoyed doing. And so I always grew up very keen on exploring different things. And I know everyone doesn't look at being a jack of all trades in like a good light. Not saying that I am, but I think that in that same capacity, like there were a lot of things that I liked exploring, and I was comfortable with not having one thing that I devoted my entire life to. So I think that that was a huge part of why I wanted to come abroad to the US, was because one, like New York City's always been a dream. Like who doesn't dream of New York? For me, that was like a huge part of my thing. I was like, okay, like I know long term one day I'll move to New York, I'll settle down there, everything will be good. But in the interim period, when it came to picking schools and stuff, I was like, okay, I want to pick somewhere where I can get the ability to explore all these different sides of myself. Because I grew up in a family and a community, my immediate community, I'd say, that was really supportive of me indulging in all those different passions of mine. So that was kind of my journey. And then now I moved here 2018, finished school last year, and now I've been living in New York City for 8-9 months now, which is insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a while.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
First, it is so amazing and refreshing to hear that, you had a community and an immediate family that was so supportive and encouraging of you really exploring things that you were passionate about. I feel like in the Indian community, it's really rare to hear
100%.
people with that type of upbringing and to be encouraged to look at things apart from their academics. In a lot of Indian culture, it emphasizes academics literally until you're graduated undergrad, have a job. It's like that's the main priority. Growing up here, we did so many extracurriculars and stuff like that, but in some regards, a lot of it was still for an academic reason.
Like Ivy League schools are like, it'll look good on college apps.
Exactly.
Everything is catered towards your look and your persona.
Like the optics of it.
Yeah.
Optics, exactly. So it's amazing that, you grew up with the notion that these extracurricular things are supposed to add to your life, more for a personal satisfaction, less for an external appeal. So love that. And I honestly hope we hear more of that, in the future. And that's the kind of parent I want to be.
I know.
And this is something that I've realized after I moved abroad, had friends who have grown up here but are of Indian backgrounds, is that I think parents and families that have immigrated here are more likely to stick to their Indian roots in way of preserving the values of their country. Whereas in India now, at least in the metropolitan cities, and I'm from Mumbai, so for me, in that circle, my family was very not westernized. My parents are still very desi and they enjoy and embrace desi culture, but definitely the outlook for India then is okay, how can we become more America, which has problems and not so many problems, but it's very complicated as a sentiment. But overall, I think that's kind of where that gap started bridging. And so even today when I got questions from people oh, but how do you understand American pop culture, or how do you know all these references, I'm like, okay, but I grew up around them. And so it didn't feel like I was removed from the culture, because the stimulus I was being given was that of an India that's trying to progress and become more westernized, because that's a sign of progress and globalization. So completely different political argument, but I think that's kind of what made things easier maybe. But yeah, I think if it weren't for my parents, it wouldn't have been as supportive. They've always almost been you don't need to worry about a grade, you can do your thing. Yeah, but also I think it's because I'm super type A. So if they didn't do that, I would probably be stressing out in my room, trying to study for an exam 24/7.
I know.
I'm that girl.
It's so funny. Diksha and I have this in common, where there was just a certain point where I think our parents were like, okay, you guys are crazy, so we're just gonna be it's fine.
It's fine.
It doesn't matter because you're nuts.
So they console us.
They would start
in the deepest, darkest depression.
A turn where they're we're scared of them.
It's not just us, it's them. You're the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I also loved what you said about finding your passions, or being able to explore so many different things. And I feel a lot of times we view passions as something you need to know. You're a savant when you're 5 or something. But getting to experiment with all of the different things that you got to as a child growing up, and even now, kind of reinforces the thought that a passion doesn't need to be stuck in a box, right? It doesn't need to be an industry or a particular job. It can be a skill, or even just being a great conversationalist or is a good listener. All of those things could be passions in their own right, almost. And I feel you got that perspective earlier on.
100%. And I think that we're in such an age, you said this, is all of it is about the optics now, especially because it's social media. The only thing people care about, or you start caring about, is what story am I posting? What am I posting online? What are my TikToks like? And so at some point it becomes less about what you actually want to do and more about how does this look / validate me or commodify another part of me.
Yes.
Because I feel everything's kind of become about commodifying every single part of ourselves. I think it's refreshing when I have friends who come up to me and are like, I'm gonna build a Lego set for fun and not because I want to post a YouTube video about it. And I was like, oh, that's great, because everything suddenly become content, which is a whole nother conversation to have. But I agree with you. It doesn't have to be confined to a job title or like something that you identify with. It can just
something
be
quantifiable that you need to label yourself as
exactly.
or something. So this is funny because the next question is, what did you want to be growing up? Which is like a full label, but it doesn't even have to be a particular job. Were there things that you gravitated towards growing up that you were like, I want to do this when I'm an adult?
Okay, this is a question I'll ask you guys. First impressions, you've known me, we've been talking, like you guys have a good sense of my personality. What would you think that my first dream job would have been?
Business, baby.
Really? Business. Like, monetize the shit out of your life.
She's a corporate girly through and through.
Consultant? Like I was born a consultant. Wait, for real? You think so?
I think business in the sense that I think you're really personable, and I feel like conversation was flowing so easy, and I don't know, you just seem like such a people person, and I feel like business careers, people like that can really succeed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I know. My thought went completely different. Like I feel like something in like psychology or like sociology, because you are a huge people person, but you also have a lot of, I don't know, like evidence or like facts behind your analysis of people.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm seeing through conversations with you. So I think you would be really curious about things like that, but I don't know.
Wait, those are good guesses because I was an econ and poli-sci major with a minor in sociology in school.
Oh my god!
So you're like,
we killed it.
But no, when I was younger, like my first ever, like what I wanted to be growing up, like a label, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Really?
For like a solid, guys, like 7 years. And then I wanted to be like a rickshaw driver. And then I pivoted back again and I wanted to be a dancer for a while. And then I actually figured out that I wanted to be a consultant. Whoever thinks that they're gonna say something like that, right? I'm waiting to be jaded. Maybe one day I'll stop loving my job. But I realized that I wanted to be a consultant sophomore year of college. So it came ways later, which is comforting for me because now when I talk to people that I mentor or just like conversations I have, it's like comforting to also look at them and say you don't have to have it figured out. But when I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut, and I think a huge part of that was one, fascination with like something that's bigger than you, and then two, I grew up in a family of scientists, whether that was political scientists or like doctors or history buffs, and like people who really rooted all of their arguments in literature and fact and study. And so I grew up in a very academic household, and I think it just made sense to me that I just want to study science and then just be an astronaut, which is why it stayed for 5 years. But I think the first time I realized that I wanted to do it was because I probably saw the moon and I was like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah.
Let's go
Seems
land.
pretty fun. Yeah.
I wonder what's over there.
I don't want to know.
That's so interesting because my first job that I wanted to have was to build a flying car. It wasn't a job, but
I love that.
That was my
She's dreaming.
dream.
She's
I was
truly
like,
dreaming.
I am building a flying car. But it's also what's emphasized in your childhood. And so like when academics and science are so revered and then you're like, yes, this is what I want to do. I think it takes a while for you to like actually figure out not only what you want to do, but what you're almost naturally like predisposed to be good at, because I think part of it was me just recognizing, oh, I'm like a good communicator. I'm good at like making connections and building a plan. So like it's almost like a mixture between what you want to do and what skills you have in you.
100%. It's like a mapping activity.
Yeah.
Like the older you get, you're like, you could like something in theory and on paper, but you could be horrible at it. So then you're like, maybe this isn't for me. I think there's a lot to say about unconventional careers that you learn more about the older you get. I'm not saying consulting is an unconventional career at all, because it isn't. But in India, like not a lot of people know what consulting is. And so for me, I was never exposed to it. But turns out my skill set is best suited for a career that I didn't even know existed 8 years ago. Do you know what I mean? So I think a huge part of that is just like growing up and like finding those things that maybe make sense and don't make sense. And then you're like, where does this intersect?
Where do I fit?
Where does
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
And I completely agree with that idea of kind of molding as you grow up, because it's really easy to be in a certain path and be scared to like leave that path, even if you know you're not great at it. And I feel like that was in part a little bit of my story because, you know, I kind of knew I didn't want to code and I didn't love coding pretty early into my CS major. But I did push through, and like, for better or for worse, I don't know. But I think it's definitely helped me in my job today because I'm not like fully removed from it. But I do think now that I'm in my current job, I do feel almost a sense of freedom in that I can explore other things and still feel productive in my day-to-day while also being able to get closer to what I really, really want to do. And I think the more I grow up, the more I realize like what those things are and also what I'm good at. It takes time and experience in whatever you're doing to understand what your skills are. You can think you're good at something, but then once you actually do it, like you said, it's like,
you don't know.
was I ever good at this?
Yeah.
Because it's like I feel like for the longest time we only know job titles, but we don't understand job descriptions. So it's very easy to look at something and say, I want to be a journalist, but then I worked in journalism and I was like, I hate this. This is not a right fit for me. This is not making me think the way I want to think. It isn't giving me the satisfaction I want. And so it's a lot of like trial and error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when did you decide you wanted to actually come to the US?
When I was 8th grade.
So pretty young.
Very young.
Okay.
But I think the long shot for me was always New York. I was open-minded about how I would get to New York, but the end goal was always New York.
Okay.
And so for me, it was like, college, I can go anywhere I want. Don't care. But if I don't move to New York after college, then that would have been a problem.
Okay.
You know, not for my parents
Yeah.
or family, just for me internally.
Yeah.
They would be like,
Your
oh,
own
she's
personal
going
problem.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would not have been okay. And I think a huge part of that is because I watched a lot of YouTubers that like would travel to New York and things like that. So it's like very idolized, which is fair. But then also I grew up in Mumbai and that's like
Big city life.
big city life. It's like if LA and New York had a baby, it would be Bombay because there's the financial district, Wall Street kind of side to it, and then there's also Bollywood and acting and like artsy stuff. So it's like it's like an ocean of everything, and it's very busy.
Priya, maybe we need to move to Mumbai.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
A hybrid of
There's a beach
New
there.
York. Okay.
We just talking about Priya loves beaches. Juhu Beach.
I want to visit at least. That's so funny. I'm also a big YouTube girly. And so I totally understand. Like,
Who are your YouTube like big ones you watch?
oh my god. Jenim.
I love Jenna was like, I watch her videos now. I just put
Me
them on
too.
the background because they're so calming. Did you watch her Korea vlog?
Yes. I literally watched it yesterday.
She's good. I like her. I like her.
I
a lot.
know, I love her. I like feel like I grew up with her. Like, and then I used to be like a big beauty YouTuber, which
Me too.
Zoella and stuff. Yeah.
like what did I learn? I still don't know how to do my makeup or my hair, but I was really out there watching every makeup technique video.
Do you know Tam Kaur?
no, who's that?
She's the Manna Kaur. She's amazing.
She's
she
really
makes
good.
the most inspiring videos on how to be feminine and
Yeah.
like, you know, grow to appreciate your feminine energy and like how to be independent, how to date.
Damn.
She honestly does the best videos and they're so inspiring. Like if I need a boost of energy.
Yeah, if you
and,
need
like,
to snap out of
confidence,
a funk, just
You
watch
watch her episodes.
one of her videos.
So good. I
she'll
love
be like,
her.
no.
She is so insightful. The way she phrases things like really clicks for me personally.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my god.
I
Once you
love
hear
that.
something that clicks, it's like you
It
just need to hear
stays with
one
you.
way.
Yeah.
But yeah, amazing. So now you're here
I'm here.
and you're living away from your family and maybe some of your friends too. And that must have been really challenging. So how was it like acclimating to college when you first joined? First time, I'm assuming, being away from home. How was that?
I remember a week before I like moved for school, I was so excited the whole point leading up to it. And I went to an international school, and I say that because everyone in my grade went abroad to study post high school. So some of my best friends are in Canada, some of them are on the other side of the country, some of them are in Australia. I have friends in Netherlands. I have
Okay, all over.
all over. I probably have friends in every single continent at this point. And that was really hard for us to like, at least for me, to come to terms with when I turned 21. Because when I was starting to like get prepped to go to Penn State, I was so excited. I was on a high. I was like, okay, like I've wanted this my whole life. I've always wanted to move abroad. It's finally happening. School starts next semester and I'm like just caught up in the excitement of being a freshman. Also, I had one of my friends from high school go to the same college as I did. And we were going to be roommates. So that worked out really well. So that kind of excitement and support system was also at the back of my mind. But 1 week before I left was when I got really stressed out. I just cried to my mom and I was like, oh my god, what if I don't, like, I can't go. And she's like, "Girl, you're gonna be fine," especially because I'm an only child. And so that was like a big moment. After that, my parents dropped me off and I was honestly completely fine. I don't think I've ever been homesick
Oh my god.
in
Wow.
the 5 years that I've been here. Not once.
Your mom knows you well.
My mom knows me well.
Yeah.
I have not been homesick once. And like that's not to say that I don't miss my family. Obviously, like it's if I'm sick, I want my mom and like I want my mother's tepla, like, you know.
Yeah.
But because I'm so close to them, I'm on FaceTime with them like all the time.
Right.
It doesn't really change the way I go about life. Like if I call my parents, they will wake up at 3 a.m. my time or their time to like talk to me. So do I miss the place itself? Yes, but I think the way I started thinking about acclimating to the States was anything in life has like pros and cons, right? If I missed Mumbai more than I wanted to stay in New York, I wouldn't be here right now. But I don't. So it's not that missing doesn't exist. It's just that my love for this city and for this phase of my life overpowers that feeling of like being homesick. It was always at the back of my mind, but it never really like hit or took over, or like I was never in my bed crippling crying like, oh, like I'm homesick. And I think a huge part of that is because I was so once social. As an extrovert, my natural tendency is to go and find other things to do and like people to talk to, usually if I'm like feeling any type of way. And then two is because I came here with a goal. I came here with like an econ degree, but I didn't know what to do in my career when I moved here. And so that was the pressure I put on myself. I was like, okay, I have 4 years to figure this out. Like I can't put any of my parents' money like to waste, you know? Like I better be graduating and learning and getting a job here so that then I can make that money back. And no pressure from my parents at all. But that was that kind of like intrinsic motivation that I think kind of pushed me to be like, I don't have time to be sad. So, you know,
you have like things to do.
Yeah. Now this like long-winded answer to why I started talking about my friends and saying I don't realize it till like I'm 21, 22 that I miss them is because I was so excited to leave that in that moment I was like, okay, like everyone's done with high school drama. You're like, okay, I'm done with you guys. Like, you guys annoyed me. Like, whatever. Bye. See you never. And we came from a really small high school, like 80 people in our grade.
Oh, okay.
So like tight. And then I turned 22 and I realized that all my best friends are like not in the same country as me, and that truly my best friends are still some of my favorite people from high school and not college. And so now I think I will physically crave my friends' presence more. But that's also because I know I can have that easier than my family's presence. Because they're all like in Canada or like in the US somewhere. That's easier. The second I actually put my headspace in like craving my family's presence like that, then it would just be difficult.
Yeah.
So I never even let myself get to that point. Because that's a little harder to achieve.
Yeah.
But yeah, long-winded answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
makes
that's
a ton of
honestly a
sense.
very mature way of thinking about it. When you are so far away, like, I can imagine, because college was some of like the hardest days of my life. It's like an emotional, physical change,
Yeah.
like a stark realization that you're not the best of the best. I don't know. There's like so many realizations and like coming of age moments there. So not having your parents in person talk you through some of that or like see you on the weekends, I can only imagine. So the way you think about that is extremely refreshing and a very mature way of thinking about it. You are able to like push yourself out of your comfort zone and like make connections, talk to new people, and like build those relationships, which I think is crucial, like especially when you're exploring a brand new country and reacclimating yourself to a culture that, yeah, you're aware of, but like now you have to fully adapt into again. So, wow.
No,
Yeah. I know, and I really think that that point you made about if you wanted to be in Mumbai more than you wanted to be here right now, you would be there. And I think ultimately, obviously there's trade-offs in everything we do, but we have so much ownership over like every choice we make. I mean, hopefully you do. And like hopefully you're not constrained somewhere that you don't want to be, but like a lot of times it is a choice, and like you know what you're gaining here, and like the most expansive self-growth comes out of discomfort and comes out of not having your safety net all the time. And that's when you have to just full throttle like learn about yourself and learn how to take care of yourself. And the fact that you had to do that so early on, for us that happened when I was 21, like graduating college and like actually moving to New York
for the first time.
that was my actual adulting, because we went to school in Virginia and our parents lived in Virginia, so like it was far, but it was close enough that
they could literally at any crisis get in the car and roll 2 hours and see us,
and they did, and we did. So but yeah, I think it's so amazing that you had that earlier on, and you got to like build your own confidence within yourself, that you're like, I know how to take care of myself and I know why I'm here. And like having that really deep understanding helps make that homesickness feeling, or like, you know, all of the sacrifices that you are making to be here really clear on like why you're doing that.
Yeah. To give you guys some credit, because I don't think a lot of people see it this way, so I'm just gonna say it. I think that a huge part of why I was so comfortable making those decisions was because I had a strong sense of identity. A huge part of that is because when I was younger, I grew up in a country where I was part of the majority. So like nobody ever made me question the color of my skin or like the experiences of being a minority, and a lot of that foundation's fully like shaken up when I moved to college. So that was a completely different experience. Whereas I know that from friends and otherwise, and totally correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of my friends who grew up in the country but were Indian had a tough time navigating their identity because they were more often than not in environments where they were part of the minority. And so like then if you grow up with constant stimuli of feeling like you have to question where you come from, where your roots are, what your values are, you're getting like two different sets of everything at home and then in school and things like that, it's tough. And so you guys have a completely different outlook on life, right? Like you almost grew up tougher too, and so technically yes, I moved to the country sooner, but then you were also struggling with the same things that I struggled with at 20, probably since you were like 2 years old.
That's
So that's such a
interesting.
unique perspective. And I feel like I'm unpacking a lot of that now. Like I did not even have that awareness that we were like living in this, I don't know, like because you're living in a bubble and you're like everyone's going through this, so like whatever.
We're like, this is normal. Nothing
It's
to
normal.
complain about.
Yeah, I can't complain about it and like blah blah blah. I mean, it's not complaining about it, it's just being aware of it, that like, oh, you know, we were raised as minorities, we had to code switch all the time. And we still do, and like now it's just snapping out of it and being like, what am I? I'm just like acting differently, or like I'm noticing that I'm insecure in certain settings because I'm the only female or I'm the only person of color, and like you notice those things more now because it's talked about more. But yeah, like even navigating that coming from another country adds like a completely additional layer of it. But that's so interesting. Yeah, I never thought about like people's upbringing and how that affects you, like when you're in a like more homogeneous society versus a more like diverse one.
I went to Penn State, so like predominantly white school, and like you start comparing your sense of like self-worth and like how attractive you think you are, etc. You compare it to what the white standard is, and it's tough. And yes, I was thinking that, but I noticed that my friends who'd grown up here and were in environments when they were really young where they felt like they had to question the color of their skin were more likely to come to me and be like, every single time I leave the house, I'm so aware of the fact that I'm dark skinned or that I'm Indian, because I always am actively like, oh, this is what makes me unattractive, because that's the stimulus they got when they were younger. Whereas for me, yes, I'm conscious in some environments, but that was never my first thought, because I never had to leave the house and think, how do I look different than someone, right? So that in and of itself in a way is a privilege. Like I grew up in a place where like, yes, like safety and all is different, like that's one spectrum of it, right?
There's some other things,
so many different nuances, but just in like terms of, you're right, like being in a homogeneous and then a diverse society, you have different things you interact with. So I think each environment comes with its own struggles, per se.
Yeah.
Definitely. Initially, when you first met, you mentioned a very unique experience you had when COVID first hit.
Yeah. So COVID hit 2020 March, and I couldn't go back home to India because borders shut down and things like that. And so I went and lived with my best friend and her family, her extended family, so her aunt and uncle, not even her parents, for like 6 months. And it was the funnest time of my life. It was so great. It was like living with your best friend 24/7. We literally can't escape. I can't go anywhere. She can't go anywhere. If she was mad at me, she would just like turn her back. So like that was really formative. But after that, I moved back to India because border control lifted or whatever. And I lived at home for like 7 months. In those 7 months, I came home and my mom was with me, but my dad got stuck in another city because he was traveling for work. And so because of that, it ended up like him not being around for like the first few months of COVID. And that sucked because I grew up as an only child really close to both my parents, and grew up like always like telling them stories and like having these conversations and always talking to each other. And now in COVID, it's like when you're with each other 24/7, it's like obviously like everyone's like, oh, I don't want to talk to someone all the time. So for me, it kind of became more about like, I went more inwards. I started exploring my passions more, what I enjoyed more. And I realized that one of the things I really liked was storytelling. And I would do school 7 p.m. onwards, but in the day, really nothing to do. Like I would hang out with my mom, I would watch TV, I would eat food, and then I'd be like, oh, what do I do now? And so that's kind of when I started off my first podcast. That was like the first time I started something that was my own, and I was like, okay, like I've always wanted to do something with content. I never really knew where exactly I wanted to do it, and the podcast felt like a really good place to start because I've always loved storytelling, been social, and I felt like I wanted to have a space to just thought dump all of my ideas. So that was a really big turning point. That podcast shut down for multiple reasons. Just don't think it was like the right place and time, because I think the scope of it was too broad. And then I restarted my new podcast 8 months ago now, and it's definitely more fit to my brand, and it's exactly what I want it to be, and all of these things. But I think that was a space of intense creativity, because I almost felt like there was so much built up energy that I couldn't expend in other places in an environment. Like I couldn't go to dance class, I couldn't go for walks after a certain amount of time. So for me, it was like, okay, what do I do with this energy? And so I think the manifestation of that was me leaning more into my passions and my creativity in like a non-physical capacity.
Yeah. That's so inspiring that during a time of like lockdown, when you know you were like experiencing being home but it not feeling fully like home because your dad wasn't there and it wasn't like the normal environment you were used to, that you turned to creation. We tried to do that and it literally didn't work.
It's tough. You're in the same space every day. There's a big lack of inspiration, and at the same time there's also a lot of inspiration because you're constantly on your phone, you're constantly seeing what other people are creating and doing, and you kind of can get into this interesting cycle of consumption, and then you're like watching TV endlessly. It's like a loop. But to be able to break out of that and like think about what can I add to this is really hard actually. And even when you try to do it, you can have one day where it's like, oh my god, yay, I made a TikTok today. And then like the next day it's like, man, I am not getting out of bed. There's a lot of emotions during that time because it felt like doom. And it was very scary. So like, it's like really hard to be consistent in that environment. So I really respected all the creators, especially during that time, that were using it in seemingly a very productive way.
I feel like that's why the first podcast didn't work out, because lockdown was all about like fear, right? Everyone was so fear ridden. Like nobody knew what was going on. Like we're like, where is this world going? There was so much uncertainty. And so part of the podcast was almost born from a place of fear, which is what I think made it really unauthentic after a certain time. That's kind of why I felt like eventually it wasn't something I wanted to create the second I left that environment, because I was creating that for the 7 months that I was in lockdown, but then after that I stopped. And so it almost became like my own little therapy room in my closet, like under like this sound foam, and I'm like, oh, like talking to myself. And like I enjoyed that. You're right, because it was almost like you know what it is? I think lockdown brought a lot of clarity for people that had been pushing away things that they wanted to do for a long time, because now you have all this time and you have no excuses. Like where are you gonna hide? Where are you gonna go? And so for me, that was a huge part of the process too, because I've always known I've wanted to do things that aren't just academic or things that aren't just my full-time job. I just didn't know how that would come and like where that would manifest. And that was the first point of me exploring and being like, wait, content isn't just TikTok, content isn't just YouTube. It can be so many different things. And I just wanted to start scratching the surface of that. But it was scary, which was, you know, a very normal space to be in.
Yeah, like taking that initial first step requires the most bravery almost. And so like I think the fact that you did that during lockdown and like got that experience out of the way, and I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to know when something's not working, right? And like being like, this isn't it. I'm not feeling inspired to do this anymore. And walking away from it is like, it's labeled as a failure in society when a lot of times it's just redirection for how you actually want to create, and you learn so much about yourself in that experience. Almost. Yeah, I think that's amazing. And also, Diksha and I always talk about this, but doing this alone is another layer to the whole thing, because we've always kind of gotten to lead on each other. How did you know that you wanted to do this alone? Was it ever like a thought of, did I want to do it with a friend, or like you wanted to expand it in like a group way, or you were always, I want this to be my platform?
I never wanted to do it with anyone else. I always wanted it to be mine, because I realized that there's a lot of parts in life that I recognized that I didn't have autonomy over, whether that was my job, whether that was school in some ways, like things where you're a part of a system that needs you to do certain things to get to a certain point, right? Like I have to play the game of school, or like jobs and like social circles and all of that stuff. And it felt like starting my content was the one place where I had full autonomy over my creativity, my journey, and what I wanted that to look like. Especially because I never started the podcast thinking I just want to do the podcast, you know? I started the podcast with an awareness that I don't know what I want to do next, but I know that the podcast is the first step to starting to do everything else. And so now with the mentorship platform and the workshops and everything else that I'm pursuing, it's like I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't put myself in a room and forced myself to make content, even on days that I wasn't feeling inspired, because I know for a fact that if I had someone else to do it with, I'm the kind of person who would have just become more lax about it. For me, it would have been counterproductive. Whereas with you guys, I feel like you guys bounce off of each other's energy really well, so you're almost more productive.
Yeah.
We also need each other to hold each other
Accountable. Yeah.
I feel like both of us are in between type A and type B people. We're like
Yeah.
right in the middle where we could be type B, but we also could be type
Yeah.
A.
And also, I think we're type A about different things.
Yes.
Which is why it works out really well.
It's very complimentary.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
complimentary, which we lucked out on because
Yeah, yeah.
I think we figured that out as we developed the podcast and like figured out where our strengths lie. It's a very unique process doing
But
it
it
with someone
works.
else. If you find the right person,
100%.
it works out great, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And like I think that's why for me it would have been counterproductive, because I know that I would have been way too chill. I knew I had a very like unique goal going into it, and I couldn't expect someone else to have the same goal, because someone else would probably just be doing it for fun with me. But it wasn't just fun for me. Do you know what I mean?
It was serious.
It was
endeavor
serious
for you.
endeavor for me.
Yeah.
So I've always enjoyed it, and also I kind of like doing it alone because it feels like a little audio journal. Like it feels very cathartic, and it's really nice to sit with myself and be like, what do I want to think about today? It's almost like, what am I struggling with today? How can I give myself advice?
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun.
And that really comes across when
Thank
listening
you.
to your podcast. You have thought through like a certain thing that you're experiencing or a topic, and then you just being able to convey that to a broader audience in a very personal way.
Yeah.
And that's such a unique skill.
Thank you.
Even for us, I'm like, we still need to prepare so much to be like
Yeah.
talking off the cuff, and I feel like that comes really natural to you.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. So that was your COVID experience and your first trial of the podcast. And then you moved to New York, and one of the things that literally stuck out to me when we first met was, I was like, oh, like, did you have friends in New York, like social circle, anything? And you were like, no, not really. Like, I made all my friends through Bumble BFF. And I was
Me,
like,
myself,
bro,
and I.
what? I was like, that is baller. So, like, I really need to hear about how you built your social circle
I got
here.
to. Well, I think it's because I'm extroverted. One, I kid you not. I came to the last year this time, I was crying to my best friend. I was like, am I going to make friends in the city? Like, I'm going to be alone. Like, nobody's going to be friends with me. What am I going to do with my lonely, like, NYC life? And then I came to the city, and I had one of my mutual friends who I was really close in high school was like, hey, I have a friend who just moved to the city. Do you want to meet her? And I was like, oh, yes. So I met her, and then she introduced me to all of her friends who are also now my friends. I'm eternally grateful for this girl, right? She's amazing. And so I was like, oh my god, like now I suddenly have these group of girls and guys that I'm hanging out with that I met through mutual friends. And so that was my first circle. And then I had friends that I made at work that introduced me to other friends. I was like, oh, this is like a different circle of friends. Then I started going to a bunch of things alone in the city. I really enjoy solo dates. Only child trait. I need my time alone. Like, I love being an extrovert, but then at the end of the week, I'm tapped out and I'm like, I need to take myself on a date. And so a lot of that for me was like, I would go to art cafes, or I would go to workout classes, or like comedy clubs sometimes, like whatever it was. Like, I still go out eat by myself, or like cafes, and I just spend time there alone in bookstores and stuff. And I started to meet a lot of friends in the city naturally who would just sense the vibe check. Then I'd be like, oh, like, you're a cool person. I want to be friends with you. And then Bumble BFF was also a huge way for me to, like, not just meet girls and friends that I genuinely felt connections with, but also how all of my friends met their friends. So now our friend circle is just Bumble BFFs. New York is a lot about mutuals. It's like trading Pokemon cards. Like, you know, like you have to bring friends to a party and like take some friends to like your party. A lot of it is that. So I will say though, it's very easy to get caught up in that. And it's very easy to forget sometimes that, like, yes, you could move to New York for like the social life and everything, but most people move to New York for the hustle. And it's easy to get caught up with the social part of it because it's so time consuming and energy consuming to make friends and meet people all the time that you don't realize that if you continuously stick to that, then you're gonna forget why you're here. So for me, yes, I made all those friends. The first 3 months of being here, like, I was always seeing people, I was always around people. And then December hit and I was like, okay, like, chill out. Like, I have enough friends, I'm meeting enough people. So then it became less about just making friends, but it became more about how can I find people that I genuinely connect with, not just over some like random shit, right? And that's how I met you guys. Like, these are podcasters in the city. I know we're gonna connect about something, and maybe like it'll also be productive together, right? Now, even when we hang out, even if it isn't productive, there's something that actually genuinely ties us together that isn't just, oh, we bumped into each other in the city. So I think a huge part of also making friends is maybe eventually being more intentional with it once you get more comfortable and finding people that you know you probably share something with. And networking events. Go to networking events. I go to like at least one networking event a week. You just do it. And you should just go alone. Because the second you go alone, then you're not going to be scared to talk to your friend and talk to them on the side. And go to like these random things. Like I went to a blockchain networking event once. Once I went to the importance of technology and reg reporting. Like, what is regulation and risk? I'm in consulting.
The funniest.
No, guys, I'm in consulting.
Meetup.
Like,
You
why?
just had like a FINRA conference.
It was a FINRA conference.
I interned at FINRA.
No!
I literally was like, why are you interested in financial regulation?
I'm cracking up.
That
So
is
you just
iconic.
go to things that like
Yeah, I know
you
nothing
maybe
about
want to learn about or
Yeah,
whatever.
and I went to a book launch. So I launched my mentorship platform recently, and one of my first mentees that I like to say collected, because it feels like collecting little coins that I'm gonna like keep in my, you know, books forever. Oh, it's so sweet. But one of the first mentees I collected was at this freaking networking event. There was a book launch.
that.
And
Oh my
I went
gosh.
up to her and like we really connected. So I went on LinkedIn and I was like, my girl, you seem like you had a lot of questions. Just opening it up to you. If you want anyone to ever talk to, because I know you're international, whatever it is, I am here. And then that relationship is so great. Now we talk once every 2 Mondays with her list of questions and like what she needs help on. And that's another fulfilling relationship.
I
So
love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow.
that's my friendship
This is
story.
your sign to go to a networking event, people.
I will send you
No,
recommendations.
literally send me some. Like,
Yeah, I
I'll
will.
go. Our other friend, Suchi, literally told me the same thing. She's like, I've been going to network events once a week.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, I'm making friends. I was like, that's crazy. I never
Honestly,
thought about
that and Suchi also has Suchi.
Hi, Suchi.
She literally goes to a gym and now has a full gym squad of people that she met through
I
the
love
gym.
that.
So now she has gym BFFs.
Slay.
Which is
Slay.
amazing. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I need to be more like that.
You'll have friends you don't expect. Like now, I'm friends with a 30-year-old real estate agent woman who's also a woman in finance and STEM. I have a friend who's like some CEO of a fashion company. All through networking events. Everyone just wants to help. And these are all women, by the way, like badass women in STEM and like doing the
Yeah.
things that I see myself doing one day. And I'm like, oh, you're just cool. And you're in New York. And where else are you going to have access to so many just random people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So true.
I love that point that you made about figuring out the friendships that you really want to invest time in and actually find deep commonality in. And I think that's something that's really important. At a certain point, everyone has this where they're like, I have enough friends for now. If a relationship comes organically, amazing, but I don't need to necessarily go out of my way to make more friends. And first of all, the networking thing is amazing because it's a way to push yourself out of your comfort zone and also potentially make valuable connections for both your professional life and your personal life. And it could evolve in different ways. So that's always awesome. But the idea of really honing in on the friendships that you feel like come very natural to you is super important. That's something that I personally felt like I did post-grad because you know, you come out of grad with so many amazing friendships, and obviously we'll always have that mutual tie of UVA. But I do think there's something to say about the friendships that we were left with 5 years later. Those are the ones that we truly will never be able to let go of. That's just something that happens organically for us, but something that you actively and proactively chose to do for yourself here, which is amazing. And I think it's a great exercise to go through with, because then you realize the friendships that add to your life so positively and like make you feel like you're in a very supportive, encouraging environment.
Yeah, I will say, like, to your point, is that, like, a huge part of, I think, why I was so comfortable just putting myself out there and meeting so many new people and making friends was that, yes, I was scared to not make friends, but also I recognized that I had my core people on lock. I have my best friend, my, like, core friend circle from high school. I have a few friends that I'm really counting as, like, close relationships from college, and I have my family. And anything else is a happy addition. I think sometimes when you go into new environments, you feel scared because you feel like, this is where I am. This is what I'm trying to cover. I looked at it as, this is the baseline. This is where I am. That's what I'm trying to cover. This gap anyways is going to be so much more than this baseline. So I'm going to be benefiting anyways. And so I didn't feel scared because I was just like, okay, like it is what it is, you know, like it'll be
anything
fine.
that works out is great, and if not, then good riddance. I don't really
Exactly.
need that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and when you're not approaching building your social circle in this fear-based way, which I think a lot of people do. I know I did when I moved to the city too. I was like, I just need plans. Everyone in the city has plans all the time, and I don't have any. So like, I need some. And so then you're just kind of like trying to get invited to parties and trying to make friends and whatever. And then it's just not fulfilling after a while. Like, you might get those connections and invites, but after a while you're not going to feel fulfilled by that. I remember I was just like, ugh, this isn't even that fun. It's so different when you meet like someone you have a real connection with and an intentional friendship, because then you leave and you're like, oh, I was like so energized by that conversation.
I learned something new.
Yeah, that is a major distinction, and I think that's something you only really learn in adulthood. I think as a kid you're just like,
I want friends.
yeah, amazing. And so you did touch on spending your alone time. We just did an alone time episode, which
Subtle
is
plug.
one of my favorite topics of conversation. But have you ever felt uncomfortable spending time alone, or was it something just in you that was like, I'm good?
I'm good.
Yeah,
I think I'm good because I'm an only child. Guys, I've never tooted this horn so much. This is the first episode. I'm like, I'm an only child. And I'm sure you relate to this. Like, if I was sad and I came home and my parents weren't home, okay, it's my problem. Like, who else is gonna, like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, I have friends, but it wasn't like I had a sibling to, like, rely on. Or, like, when I was getting bullied in school, I didn't have, like, a sibling who would protect me. So, like, growing up for me, I was just like, oh, like, I'm figuring it out on my own. And I'm very comfortable with it. This is pivoting away from alone time, but I'll come back to alone time because I think this is, like, a good point. Is that one thing I really actively try to live my life away from is feelings of resentment. Not even anger, just resentment. And I know for a fact that that sense of only child autonomy was also because I wanted to make my own decisions, because I knew that if I ever let someone else make decisions and things went bad, that I would probably be angry and resentful, and I don't want that. And so almost proactively, I always grew up, I was like, you can give me suggestions, I will make the decision of whether or not I want to do it. I want to be 100% accountable for my actions. And then if it goes wrong, who am I to blame? Like, I'm just gonna be mad at myself. I will get over that, you know, eventually. Like, I will work on that and heal through that myself. But that feeling of having that resentment to something external, I just never wanted, and it made me uncomfortable. I don't want to give other people control over what my decisions are. So that then pivoted into alone time, in a sense that I've always been comfortable making my own decisions, being by myself. And I think the being by myself part is interesting because a lot of conversations I see are about how do you spend time alone and how are you comfortable with it, which is very fair. It's not like alone time isn't hard. Like, sometimes I'll be sitting alone and I'll be like, I'm anxious as hell. Like, I want to leave and just call my friends and hang out with someone and like be distracted, not be in my room right now. But I think that what makes alone time easier is when you stop running away from whatever you're trying to run away from. A lot of times if I'm alone and I get scared and I want to distract myself and be with someone else, it's probably because I'm running away from feelings that I've been avoiding for a while. So whether that's feelings of anxiety, whether that's fear, whether that's anger, I will not want to face it. And so my fight or flight is going to be like, go hang out with someone else. Distract yourself. Instead, I think that I always look at that as a moment to recognize that, one, okay, like I'm trying to distract myself. And then two, how I can start being comfortable by spending that time alone is looking at myself as a friend. If I would right now rather go and watch a movie with my friend, I'll just turn the movie on myself. Or like if I would rather go out with friends right now, I'll just go get coffee by myself. Things that were friend dates started becoming solo dates.
Yeah.
And then being alone just became more enjoyable because I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I started trusting myself. Long-winded response to, am I comfortable being alone? Yes, because I think that over time I've developed that sense of autonomy and trust within myself to know that even if other people don't got me, I got me.
I know. That's like ultimately such an empowering feeling, and it's hard to get to that feeling of empowerment because it comes with so much anxiety and discomfort. Like, we talked about this a bunch in our last episode of just sitting alone in public is like not a fun feeling.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary.
And you're like, oh, everyone's judging me, everyone's looking at me, like they think I'm a loser or whatever. But then like once you just get past that, you're like, oh, I have complete ownership over my time. And now I don't have to like wait to make plans with someone to try this new place that I wanted to try. I can just like try it whenever I want. Just having that option available to you and knowing that I'll be good.
I'll be good.
Once you have that reassurance, everything becomes a lot more simpler. Like you could still do that with a friend, but just knowing that you have the option to also do that by yourself and you could do it and be fine is like additional layer of confidence that I didn't even know that like I needed. But especially here, I feel like you need to flex that muscle because it's a vain city in a certain way. You know what I mean? Like,
It's all about optics.
it's all about optics. You're always comparing yourself to people. And so it's really easy to feel like a loser here, honestly, if you let yourself. So, yeah.
And I really like what you said about anything that you can basically do with someone else, you can do with yourself. Being able to switch like that and be like, okay, if I want to do this, I can still do it alone and just still have a good time. Typically, people are like sulking. I know I do when I'm like, oh man, I wish I could do this with this person. I wish I could do this with my mom, like whatever. But it's like, I mean, you can still do it alone and like it'll still feel good. It's just about like getting yourself to do that first step and like turn that movie on or like step out of the house is the hardest step, and then once you're there it's like I can do it.
Yeah.
So now we have a spicy cue, people. Okay.
Finally.
I'm scared.
Finally. Have you met someone that you realize through conversation maybe you don't necessarily click with them and you almost have to break up with them?
So you're telling me, how did I figure out someone I didn't like after meeting them for the first time, and then I'm like, okay, bye, see you later.
Maybe you met someone on Bumble BFF, they felt like they really connected with you, but you were like, not for me.
Okay, so I met one person when I went out to like a bar, and I think the one thing I love about New York City is that you can really just be anywhere and anyone wants to be friends with you. Everyone wants to be friends, but then also that can be really overwhelming. So I met one girl at a bar, and she was super sweet, and we were like, hey, like let's hang out, like let's do this, let's do that. And I really think I'm really good at vibe checks, and I can
catch
tell
people's auras.
I can catch their auras. And I had really successful bar friendships. Like one of my closest friends now is a friend who I met at a bar, and then we got drunk at a happy hour the next day, and she helped me build my bed in New York City.
Oh my gosh,
completely
amazing.
insane, right?
Wow.
But I met this girl, and the vibes were just off. And so then I tried giving her a fake number, but I accidentally like typed my real number in.
So then you bamboozled yourself.
I tried giving a fake one, but I couldn't get myself to lie.
No, because I was trying, my drunk mind was like, okay, type the fake number, and then it ended up being the real one. And so then I got a bunch of follow-up texts, and to this day I get some like follow-up DMs.
Oh, no.
It's so mean. I just say I have no time.
Yeah, okay.
Or I just ghost.
Sometimes you got to.
My thing with like guys though, like if it was ever in a relationship capacity, I'm shameless. I will just block. I will just not entertain.
I know.
I'm a big
Yeah.
blocker. No time.
Yeah.
See you
If
never.
you don't want-
Love that.
If you don't want the connection or it rubs you the wrong way, like
Yeah.
blocked.
Yeah,
Block.
absolutely.
See you never.
See ya.
See ya, bye.
Oh my
Bye.
gosh.
I like that approach though, because it's harder when it's a friendship that people are trying to pursue, especially between girls. It's not to take offense.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more complicated, I feel
Yeah.
like, with female friendships,
Yeah.
because obviously we would love to be friends with every girl, and like, you know, girl's girl, we love that, but it's like, you're not gonna be friends with everyone. I personally have had like a realization, honestly, since like moving to New York. I was very lucky in our college experience that like we had so many girls that we immediately connected with, and
Yeah.
it was honestly like overwhelming. That is like a wild success story that like I think we're very fortunate to
Yeah.
have. But I think once you start growing up and meeting more people, expanding your circle, figuring out how to not let go of friendships, but let certain ones just kind of
Fizzle on their own.
fizzle on their
Fizzle
own.
on their own.
That's a great way to word it. Is a very important skill, because at the end of the day, you don't want to devote your time to relationships that maybe just don't serve you in the way that you need. In whatever way that is, it's difficult to do that, especially because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Obviously, they're not bad people. They just are different, you know?
Yeah.
Because one part of it is like, how do you say no to or like ghost someone? Then it's like people you don't really know. But
Yeah.
I've also been in situations where I hang out with someone and then I'm like, oh, we're not the same vibe.
Exactly.
And so I've invested like months and months of friendship to then reach to a point and be like, no,
Yeah.
Not
that's
my
worse.
thing.
Yeah.
That's worse.
not
Yeah.
my thing. But there, I wouldn't say a friendly ghost. There, I would say a soft fizzle. Maybe like respond a little less. And honestly, after a certain point, communicate and just be like, hey, you're great, but we're misaligned on certain levels. Or like, if you want to make it that approach. Or sometimes people just get the vibe.
Yeah.
A lot of people just get the hint.
People can really feel when you stop putting effort in. Like,
Yeah.
it is one of the most
noticeable
sometimes
things.
Yeah, it's so noticeable, and sometimes you convince yourself when you want that relationship to be the same, you want to be like, no, like they're just busy, like whatever, like you convince yourself that no one would want to like stop spending time with you, and probably the other person feels the same way too. But then eventually you're like, but you know in your gut.
Also be like introspective, because who's trying to do that to you? Because there's probably people who are trying to soft fizzle you out.
I feel like this year I've been like, wait, so when people like stop putting effort in, maybe try a couple times if you really care about that connection, but at a certain point it drains you in a type of way where you're like, oh, I'm putting all this effort in and this person's not reciprocating, and like, why do you want that to be an influence in your 100%. Life? You know what I mean? And so you just gotta be like, have a reality check with yourself and soft fizzle it if it doesn't mean that much.
The word of the day.
So you mentioned that you started a podcast, so now we can kind of go into the passion project space.
Yes, love.
Tell us about Turn Off the Ringer.
I love it so much. My podcast, Turn Off the Ringer, came out in August of last year, and I started it under similar circumstances. The first time I started my first podcast was COVID, so lockdown. The second podcast was I couldn't go back home because I was waiting for my visa to come in. So I was in a college town alone for 4 months doing absolutely nothing, and it was a ghost town. And so that loneliness and confinement, I was just like, let me start this up again. And this time I really came to the table with like a new perspective. And with Turn Off the Ringer, the reason I named it that was because I grew up in a family of storytellers and authors and creatives, with my parents especially, where I realized that they were just so intellectual and smart and creative when their phones were away. And so for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to turn off my notifications. I'm going to turn off the ringer on my phone and like just work. And that's when I'm most creative, hence the name. And the aim with it was, I realized that I'm really driven by impact. Everyone wants to change the world. That's very vague. But impact for me looks like, how can I help at least one person in my community? Either live life differently or think about it differently. Because I truly think that a lot of our inhibitions are all negative manifestations of our own mindsets and our own mental headspace. And so for me, it was like, how can I make wisdom more accessible to my generation? How can I help people think about their problems differently? So I'm not promising you that I'm talking about things that you haven't talked about before, but I am promising you that I'm giving you solutions that you haven't heard before. Because my thing was, I've heard so many podcasts and content online about navigating fear, for instance, right? Or like navigating relationships, but nothing really helped me. And so for me, it was like, what is the most different way I can think about this in? And then how can I maybe help someone with a different approach? And that was kind of where it started. And now it's also become one about that wisdom side of things, but then also about how can I really empower people of color and communities of color, and interview people that really have cool stories, whether that's women of color, South Asian women. I've interviewed a Black woman who's in politics and also pageants, or like a South Asian freelancer and an Indian therapist. Things that people don't talk about, intersectionalities that have been like brushed over specifically with women. So that was kind of the inspiration of all of it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It resonates so much, and I feel like we grew up not getting to hear any of these stories, and so like it will never be enough. I feel like there's just constantly so much space to like hear unique perspectives and like hear wisdom through someone with your background, which like we don't hear enough voices like that, you know, and like hear conversations with the people that you talk about. It really does have so much power to shape people's mindsets, and I think like we just know that firsthand by consuming content and like knowing, oh, like this literally made me think of something completely differently because I listened to this podcast or watched this YouTube video. I think it's just really powerful stuff, and I can tell listening to it how much work and thought you really put into like what you're saying.
Thank you. It's a whole thing. I think with me, I also think about the podcast as I mentioned this. It's like a little audio journal. So a lot of times I'll just sit down, and I've expressed this to friends and family. And the day I realized that my creative productivity depended on my healing and my mental health, I've become so much better at it. If I don't journal every night before I go to bed, or if I'm not keeping in check of like my negative thinking patterns or whatever it is, one, I'm not healing. And if I'm not healing, I'm not learning. If I'm not learning, I have no content. So everything in my brain is like, oh, I gotta heal for the podcast. Like, I gotta heal for the answers. And so for me, it's kind of like, if I have a problem and I don't journal about it, then that's one episode that probably could have helped someone else.
I love that.
Because there's people that are definitely feeling the things that we're feeling, right? Like, we're not alone in the things we talked about today.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the headspace that I bring into it, which is fun.
And something that I think like also inspires me and Priya and like other podcasters like us
is that we didn't have these voices throughout high school, throughout college, and just being able to like be a voice to the younger generations is, I think, so important. Because truly, everyone I used to listen to prior to diving into the South Asian podcast space and YouTuber space was white. We don't have as many shared experiences, and it's always so refreshing to hear someone from your own background and the way they think about things. So one of the biggest motivators is knowing that people younger than us will have our platform, our episodes to listen to you know, get them through a tough time while they're growing up.
Yeah.
And hopefully they will have these lessons sooner than we had them, and they can truly integrate them into their lives at an earlier age.
Yeah.
So then they, I don't know, grow up a little bit faster in some ways, mentally and emotionally, and maybe not make the same mistakes and like think about things differently like while they're going through certain experiences.
Yeah.
100%. And that's impact then, right? Like even if you
Major
change one
impact.
life.
Yeah.
Fair.
Okay, so you touched a little bit on your first podcast, how you had a point where you were like, okay, this isn't the direction I want to go in, gonna put a pause on it. Were there any lessons you learned from that experience that transferred into Turn Off the Ringer?
Yeah, like stop functioning from a place of fear. Like I know for a fact when I started my first podcast, it was called A Little Bit of Everything. One, the scope of it was too broad. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to talk about everything because I read a lot. So for me, it was like, if I read a lot, then I can talk about a lot. That's not how content works. In terms of consuming it or producing it, one huge thing that I learned was I want to talk about the things I want to talk about. And I really came to terms with that, which is the things I talk about now on Turn Off the Ringer. The reason that I didn't do that before was because I was scared of being judged and I was scared of being cringy. What if I make content and people judge me? Like very basic things, right? You can hear it also in the old podcast, which don't do it. Don't listen to it. But if you do, right? If you do. It just sounds very unauthentic and like it doesn't sound like me. It sounds like 20-year-old Esha who's like going through the motions and doing the best she can with the times that were there. But it isn't what or who I am today. And so for me, it was recognizing that I can't let fear drive my content. And so the second I noticed myself judging myself for being critical or like cringing or being like other people are gonna cringe, I literally out loud I would sit there and be like, absolutely not. I will physically say no, even if I'm in like a room alone, nobody's around me. I'll be like, nope, that's a thought, we're just not entertaining. Because I've noticed even a few episodes, I won't point out which ones in case people notice which ones, because there's definitely like a quality difference in the content itself. Some of them came from a place of fear and then most of them didn't, and I 100% noticed that for myself. So that was a big thing for me, was how can I overcome that fear to really embrace that creative journey within me. And that was kind of the space I was in.
I feel like having that awareness and knowing when you are actually operating out of fear is kind of like the hardest thing, because sometimes when you're in that mindset, you
don't recognize it.
Notice it. Yeah, until maybe like you're listening to an episode and you're like, wait, I clearly sound very different and I'm operating out of optics. You know, or I'm like saying things that I don't genuinely believe in because I'm like thinking about
think of me.
Yeah, what, you know, thinking about the outside perspective. But I like the whole physically being like, no.
Yeah.
It helps anything in life, even if it's you going through breakups, if it's like friendship drama, any toxic thought, I've just started vocalizing and just saying no. And it works. It literally just shuts it up.
That's amazing.
Fun and fun.
That's a really fun.
No.
Slay.
No. Oh my god, it's
slow
like,
fizzles and no.
Yeah, my favorite song right now is America's Got a Problem, the Beyonce remix with Kendrick Lamar. And literally in the middle of the song, she's always just like, no. I like love that part. I'm always
No.
Giving TikTok alert.
I know. Literally.
Okay, last cue before we get to our favorite. Okay, second to last cue.
Okay.
How do you stay disciplined doing the podcast, especially since you're doing it solo?
I think this ties to what we were talking about earlier, is that I know I see a goal for myself, and I think it's easiest to stop doing things because at some point you just don't see why you're doing it anymore. So I think a huge part of anything I do is, why am I really doing it? The same way with the podcast too. I think I've never lost sight of the why, and that's what's kept me consistent. But the second you lose sight of why you're doing the things you're doing, or like why you want to help someone, or like why that brings you happiness, then it's kind of like you're waking up and just doing it for the sake of it. It's like brushing your teeth at that point, right? And like brushing your teeth is easy, but making a podcast episode is not. So chances are, if it's like the same thing, you're probably not going to do it anymore. So for me, the discipline has genuinely been always being rooted in a sense of like why. And I would also say it's learning to indulge myself sometimes. Like I'm not always going to feel the most creatively in touch with myself, and that's okay. Because I think a lot of people are harsh with themselves and say it has to be extremes, it has to be black or white. Like you have to be either producing one episode every single week or like none at all. For me though, if it was that, then I would have stopped podcasting a long time ago, right? So for me, it's that, yes, I'm making that choice of being consistent, but what consistency looks like is my decision. That's why I have a podcast by myself, right? Like I have that autonomy. I don't have someone telling me how many episodes I have to make a week. So for me, it was that kind of recognition of, okay, like I have to definitely know why I'm doing this, but also at the same time, I can give myself grace because it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that you're doing well at something. So it's been like a lot of growth in that capacity too, of like generally getting to the point where I'm like, oh, like I'm doing something cool. If someone consumes it or no one consumes it, I would still do it because I'm doing it for me. So I think that's been like a solid foundation for why I've continued to be consistent with it.
And I think consistency is really even hard when you have an accountability partner because it's still work. And I think people underestimate the amount of work being consistent to especially something creative takes, because it is not all fun and games all the time. Like, yeah, like the end product looks like it was so fun and cute and whatever, but while you're doing it, it's still a lot of hard work, thought, manual labor. Like there is a lot of that and like attention to detail that people don't see. They just see like the end 30-second TikTok and it's like, this took me 4 hours. And I have to learn a dance. Like literally, people don't understand that fully, especially when they're not doing it themselves. That's a lesson we're still learning about consistency and like how to figure out what our rhythm is with it. And I think, once again, like you said, every single creator, every single person's consistency means something different. And like figuring out what is comfortable for you, but also like what pushes you is a really difficult thing to do, and something like we still haven't even figured out yet, but a journey that takes a long time, I think.
And I think consistency can mean different things at different times in your life. Like it really depends on where you're at, and it's a hard balance to be like, okay, I want to put things out that I'm really proud of, but I also don't want to get into this like perfectionist mentality where I will like never put anything out. And so I think grace is a big part of that in both respects, where it's like your content isn't going to be perfect, and also you're not perfect, so like you're not going to be able to meet every single goal that you want to. We're not robots. We're also all still having 9-to-5 jobs and trying to, you know, have a life and all these other things. So it's going to be difficult, and honestly it's like uncomfortable sometimes to be like, this is cool, I'm like really happy that I'm doing this and I'm proud of myself that I'm doing this, and like giving yourself that pat on the back every once in a while is also part of that fuel to like keep motivating you to put stuff out there.
100%. And I think you guys have like such cool content. Like that's part of the reason why I loved your first few episodes that I listened to. It genuinely felt like I'm like talking to two friends, or like listening to two friends talk. And that's what you want when you create content. I want my listeners to feel like I'm there with them, because audio content is so different and it can be less engaging in some capacities if you're not recording videos. But I think you guys do a really good job at talking about things that really make your listeners feel included. And a lot of times I'll hear you guys talk and be like, oh yeah, me too, guys. Like same. But
that's what our goal was in the experts community. So glad it resonated with you. Okay, it's favorite time,
ladies.
I'm excited
because you're such a networking and mentorship pro and podcaster. What is your favorite question to ask someone when you're trying to like get to know them, if you have one? If not, like
topic is good too.
Topic.
Favorite question to ask someone, and this is to break the ice. It might sound lame, but it always works. It's just a simple, why are you here? What brought you here? And people will say more than they... Because I think the deadbeat questions that I always get asked is, so when did you move to the city? Or like I don't want to talk about it anymore. Like every month,
what do you do?
I don't want to talk about when I moved to the city, or like, and those are great questions. But I think, so what brings you here today has been such a fun question, because I've been going to a lot of networking events, and oftentimes I've learned that the second I ask that question, it opens the door just wide enough for someone to either tell me their whole professional life or just trauma dump.
Either way.
Yeah, because like, what brings you here to a professional event? This is my career trajectory. I'm here to learn this.
Yeah.
Trauma dump will be, this is a book launch that made me realize that my ex was a piece of shit. So like trauma dump on you. And I'm like, okay, I didn't want to know that, but sure, you know?
Yeah.
So usually I definitely lead with like what brings you here? I think is that a good
I
answer?
love that.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I love
start-
that.
I'm gonna
It's a
start
good
saying
question.
that.
That's a good one. Yeah, I might steal it.
It gets people talking.
I
Yeah.
think about it. I'm like, what if you just went to a brunch with all your friends or whatever? You're like,
What
What brings you
here?
here? They're like, leave. Nothing.
seeing
Not
you
you.
here.
Not you. Wait, what is your guys' go-to?
Oh my god, I didn't think about that answer for myself.
I know, neither did I. I was like thinking about it while you were saying yours.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I have like a go-to, but I generally feel like the topic that I get the most out of is asking people about how they met their group of friends. I feel like you always get like a story, or like who are your like closest friends in the city, or like, you know, what's your social circle
What's your
like?
story?
It's kind of a dicey question because if
Someone
it is
has no
someone,
friends.
yeah, like if this is an insecurity of someone's, then I'm like definitely triggering them. But most of the time, you get a pretty, I don't know, like a fun answer, or that like you're like, oh, I met most of my friends through college, or sometimes you get like a very unique answer where it's like, I met my best friend doing something random, or like on the street or whatever, and you get a good story out of it. So I feel like that's a good
Good question. I like it.
My question is kind of generic, but I like to ask people what they're watching.
Oh,
That's pretty good.
that's
That's
I
good.
know.
That's
I
a
feel
good
like-
go-to.
Yeah, I think it's an easy one because everyone watches something, and then it's like
You would think.
yeah, you think. And there's a few shows that are like popping off constant, so you can like kind of connect on that, and then that kind of leads into like other conversation. I feel like,
Yeah.
or like related shows, or like related events about those shows, or things like that.
Yeah.
Which I think is always really interesting. For me personally, I find it easier to connect on things that do not relate to work. You know what I mean?
Same. Well,
Yeah.
might be tough at a networking event if it's
Not
career
necessarily the best
oriented.
networking question.
Fair.
But I feel like it helps me understand a person outside of work, and that's where I best connect with people, not necessarily like career passion. You know what I mean?
Because it's like you're stuck in an office usually, talking to people that are in your career for majority of your week in life. That's also like one of my favorite questions at work. Usually when I meet people through coffee chats and stuff, is like, what do you like doing in your free? And I've learned that when I'm talking to people that are higher up in like leadership positions, that's such a good question to like humanize someone. And you're like, oh, you're a person. You're not just like a partner.
Yeah, you're not just like an MD somewhere
Yeah,
or whatever.
CEO.
You know? Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I'm going to use your question.
Thanks. I'm gonna use yours.
Great.
No one needs to use that.
I do be using yours.
I was gonna say it's already in my
it's
list.
already in the repertoire.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Esha, for being
I
on
know.
our pod. This is such a girl chat episode.
I
I think people are going to love listening to this.
Yes.
you
Give
for
her to do
having
it
me.
again.
Yes.
I feel like we touched on so many topics, and then we can have a series
Yeah.
of drilling into each one,
Different
honestly.
one. Yeah, we're doing an episode on my podcast too, which will be super fun.
Yes.
Plug.
And speaking of plugs, Esha, please plug yourself in every which way.
Oh.
We want our community to
Yes.
know you and
Yes.
support you.
Yes, thank you. Well, my podcast is called Turn Off the Ringer, and that is like the main platform where I always engage. But I, as of last week, also launched my first mentorship platform. Yay! I'm very excited. It's called Help Me Help You, and I made it for specifically people of color, communities of color, underrepresented communities, and immigrant communities to kind of have the professional and personal support systems that they need to fulfill whatever goals that they have that they've set themselves out on. And then the last one, which is exciting, that I know you guys are coming to, is my workshop. Oh, but I don't know if that'll be out by then, but probably not, right? Because my workshop's next week. But we'll keep this in anyways.
Yeah.
We'll
and
keep
you're
it
going to
in
have
because you're gonna have more.
future
Oh, that's true.
ones.
I will
Yeah.
have future workshops, so I will plug that. So glad you guys had me here. Thank you for being my first in-person interview.
Yes.
Yes.
We are
I
had so much
honored.
fun.
Definitely not your last. I know.
Definitely not your last.
But thank you for having me, and I love chatting with you guys.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.